People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Andra, žena robot, Targo i Ulu približavaju se površini njima nepoznate, tajamstvene planete.
Roberte, nismo stigli.
Ko to govori? Što je ovo? Knjiga koju još pišem. Lijepa si.
Takva sam kakvu si me stvorio. Pripadam tebi.
Dobrodošli na planetu Zemlja. Pružimo jedni drugima ruke i budimo braća.
Šta je bilo?
Vidjet ćete na fotografijama.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Ms. Samm Deighan.
Hello.
Also joining us is Disconnected's Ryan Verrill.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
We continue Sci-Fi July with a look at the Yugoslavian Czechoslovakian co-production of Visitors from the Arkana Galaxy. Directed by Dusan Vukotic and co-written by projection booth favorite Milos Macourek, the film stars Zarko Potocnjak as Robert, a writer who manifests some of his own characters to hilarious results. We will be spoiling the film as we go ahead, so if you don't want anything ruined, please turn off the podcast and go see the film. It's available on Blu-ray in the U.S. from Deaf Crocodile. Sam, when was the first time you saw Visitors from the Arkana Galaxy, and what did you think?
So it's one that had been on my list for a while, but I first saw it because they asked me to do the commentary track. And I think I've said this on your show before, but Deaf Crocodile is one of those companies who puts out such obscure, lost, hidden gem type films that they're maybe the only company who traditionally, like when they ask me to work on something, I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I know a lot about films made in that country, in that time period, often cast and crew members, which was the case with this one. But I love it so much.
And Ryan, how about yourself?
I'm basically the same as Sam. As soon as they announced the Kickstarter that they were doing to raise some funds to release this Blu-ray, I jumped all over it. And I don't usually rewatch things, especially lately, unless I'm working on them. But I think I've seen this one probably 4 or 5 times now because it is endlessly entertaining. I was overwhelmed by the very just relatable humor in much of this and absolutely loved it. And yeah, same as what Sam said about Deaf Crocodile as well. This is one of those few companies I trust their curation with every fiber of my being. So it was eager to see this and it paid off in spades.
Yeah, to your point, Sam, this one had been known, had been talked about. I remember it being on people's want lists in the video trading community for a long time. And it was tough to find. I did find a version years ago, but it looked awful. So it is so nice to see this restored version with actual legible subtitles, so you don't have to sit there and go, wait, what are they saying? And actually having consistent naming of these characters, because sometimes in the bootleg version of it, Ula would have all kinds of different spellings, Andra would have all these different spellings, but luckily, everything is so nice and clean, and the picture is just amazing. It looks like this thing just came off of the press yesterday. It looks great. And I really like our main character, Robert. He seems like he could be a jerk pretty easily, but because he could be a little bit nicer to BB, his significant other, could be nicer to her. He really wants to get this book written, and the poor guy can't seem to hold a job to save his life, but he's got a lot of great ideas, and when they start to come to life, when he manifests them, yeah, I can see why he's a little bit freaked out.
It's also just such a great fantasy sci-fi premise that you have this writer whose head is in the clouds and the people around him want him to just get his shit together and lead a normal life, but the power of his imagination is so strong that he literally brings these aliens to life. But it's even beyond that. There are these one-off scenes that pop up. I'm sure we'll talk about this, but there's this sequence where he explains his childhood and how he grew. Every single scene has something wonderful in it.
Let's go ahead and just start with Robert's earliest memory. He's here where he's talking to, I guess it's his neighbor who's a doctor / psychiatrist, because he shows up again in the monster scene, the monster dinner scene. He's got to be one of these people that's in the apartment building. Is that correct?
Yeah, my impression is that it is like a therapist, professor, doctor type of figure who he sometimes consults with and knows just from local community.
Seems like a friend of the family. It's very tight-knit.
We see all these faces towards the end, and we get Photo Tony is through so much of the thing. But yeah, he is talking with this professor / psychiatrist guy and talking about how his mother died or his mother wasn't around. That's what it was. And his bottle that his milk is in breaks. And he's just an infant in this scene, by the way. This isn't when he's even 1 year old. He's just this tiny little baby, but yet he has this very clear memory of being very hungry, not having any sort of milk to drink, and so his father grows breasts and is able to breastfeed him right then and there. But then in the next shot, we cut to another area, and there's a guy with these fake breasts there, and I'm just like, is this like a manifestation again of these fake breasts? It was just really strange to me. I was like, how much of this is in Robert's head versus how much of this is really happening? And it feels like it's all supposed to be really happening, though.
Yeah, and when he goes to see the psychiatrist and asks what's wrong with me, the psychiatrist, the way he explains it is, oh, you have this thing called, I think they call it telergy, where if he wants something badly enough, he can manifest it into the world. Thus, his father growing breasts, which I did not see coming the first film. But it's funny the way that they only dole it out in certain cases. Like this could easily, and it does go into horror movie territory in the last act, which I know we'll get to. But I think you could easily make a much darker version of this film where this guy who just wants things gets them, and that never goes well for humanity. But it's much lighter than that here and quirkier.
Yes, we've all seen Wonder Woman 1984. We know how manifesting desires can go horribly wrong.
I have not seen Wonder Woman 1984, but I can imagine.
You are not missing anything, my friend.
Nothing at all.
When he's talking with the doctor, I think that's when he also manifests his own book. He doesn't manifest a lot in this movie because, to your point, it could get really crazy really fast. And we find that he can't de-manifest things. He tries at one point to get rid of Andra, Ulu, and why am I blanking on the third one? Torgo? No, not Torgo.
Targo. He
Targo.
Specifically, I think, wants to get rid of Targo, and it doesn't work.
Oh, Targo's a pain in the ass.
Yep.
Oh, I hate that kid.
I love the scene where the mother figure is literally whipping his hands.
That they dub these little kids with adult voices is also very strange in a purposeful way. So especially when the little girl, when Ulu talks, it's just, whoa.
And it reminds me of Italian horror.
I can see that.
Where the overdubbing, you're just like, why try to pretend that this is a child's voice? Everyone knows that it's not.
It's a very specific choice.
That's really the crux of this whole movie, is that he manifests characters from the book that he's working on, and he is actually writing I believe, visitors from the Arkana Galaxy. So we get to see these 3 beings coming through space from their planet, and they arrive here. And I was reminded of the Pod People, if you guys remember that movie from Mystery Science Theater 3000, also called Extraterrestrial, or even like Mr. Vampire. I can't remember if it's Mr. Vampire 2. Is that the one with the little kid vampire that they're trying to hide?
My favorite.
He tries to hide these folks, and they're on an island, so that makes it pretty easy at first, but because he doesn't like having them around, they're a real threat to him, and I can understand where he's coming from.
But at the same time, I think this taps into something that you see in a lot of Soviet films from this period and like Soviet satellite state films and other types of kind of communist cinema. This idea, especially in the 70s and early 80s, that people in cities are living on top of each other, basically in these apartment buildings. And you can't get away from your family. You can't get away from your neighbors. There are these constant intrusions on how you want to live your life versus how other people think you should live it and what your familial and communal obligations are. And the fact that it's like he does want this life as a science fiction writer, and he does want to live in his imagination, it seems, but once he's confronted with the reality and these imaginary figures have yet more demands, it's just like another set of people who keep intruding on him. His wonderful neighbor, the photographer, who keeps busting in at inopportune moments. Do these people not ever lock their doors or knock?
It's a very invasive film, and you pointed that out in the commentary for this disc quite a bit, actually. And one of the things that really hit me at the beginning when they were introducing this character is he's trying to be so creative, but every single opportunity to distract him is just ruining his time. And then I felt so bad after all of these distractions. He looks down and there's, of course, coffee spilled all over his only manuscript.
I was reminded a little bit, Sam, have you seen The Magnificent, I think it's called, with Jean-Paul Belmondo, where he's a writer and he's living in his fantasy world? Half of the movie is him in the fantasy, and then how it collides with his regular world.
Yes, but it's been a while.
Yeah, I was reminded a lot of that one with this too, but he doesn't go into the fantasy world as much. I love the way that he writes with a tape recorder, and he just dictates everything into the tape recorder, and that he puts on the big space helmet before he does that. That's so awesome. But yeah, it's interesting that he's a writer, but we don't really see him writing too often. It's more the dictation stuff, which is an interesting way of doing it. I've heard of everybody writes in a different way, but that's one I've heard before. And these days with voice text recognition might be a cool thing to do.
The more famous you would get as a writer in, let's say, the first half of the 20th century, I feel like there are so many stories of people just dictating to a secretary or to a long-suffering wife, no doubt. And here, what makes that so interesting is that it's much more cinematic. It's like we could have him sitting at a desk with some sort of voiceover, but because he's actually speaking the lines, I think it just makes it so much more engaging to watch, and also makes you feel like he is even quirkier than if he was just a conventional writer at a desk and wasn't like getting into the zone by putting this helmet on. But it makes me wish that I had some sort of magical helmet to wear every time I sit down to write.
Or you could be like James Patterson and just not write anything at all.
That's true.
I want to see you have a different helmet for every style, Sam.
For every different subgenre I write about, I have a corresponding hat.
Oh, the Cat 3 hat's going to be awful.
It's just a dead baby. I'm sorry.
I love, too, that the aliens communicate with Robert through that same recorder, that they're somehow broadcasting through it, which is a neat way of going about it, and that he will play it back and they're not on there. So that's another thing where I'm like, is this all in his head or not? But of course it's not. And yeah, we really should talk about these aliens. I already mentioned how much I despise Targo, son of a bitch. But really for me, it's all about Andra, and she's like the mom, like you said, Ryan, but she's the android, and the other two seem to be real biological beings. And there's that moment where the two kids ask her to change them, and I'm still trying to figure out what she's changing them into? Is she making them into humans so they actually do have heartbeats and other organs that are similar? Because they really point out at one part that they have very different internal things going on.
Good question.
That is a good question. And I think the film intentionally leaves a lot of that up to speculation, but it's amazing to me what they're able to pull off and how creative they get with these kind of budgetary and technical limitations. That way that you mentioned that they respond to him through the tape recorder, I love so much, because I think it's such a great, simple way of conveying that their technology is so different from his, but they're able to bridge this divide. Although at the end of the day, it does feel at times a little bit like a screwball comedy where you have this guy whose girlfriend, fiance is just trying to get him to settle down. And then along comes this other woman who's not a good match or not an obvious match, who catches his eye in a different way. And so as sci-fi and fantasy as it is, it also is really rooted in romantic comedy in, I think, some pretty unexpected ways.
Manic android pixie dream girl.
Yeah, she is.
She's great. And she's yet another robot for a nerd to fall in love with. It's just such a trope to give the guy a robot that he's going to try to convince to be a better person or whatever it is. But it's just, oh my God, we've seen this so many times. This is wild.
Well, and do you know where she's from? Like where else you can find her?
I know I've seen her. Okay. Haven't I even seen her in U.S. productions?
Yeah. So Ksenia Prohaska is her name. She's a Croatian actress, and she shows up in some random Hollywood productions like Transylvania 65000. I think she plays the mummy, I want to say.
And she's
also in Bugsy, that Warren Beatty movie, and I think some others as well. But it just is wonderful to me that she pops up in those things, because she, I believe, modeled and then was able to cross over into some more European international productions. But this is the best thing she's ever done as far as I'm concerned.
And I mentioned Milos Macourek earlier, and just so many of the things that he would play with in his films and his stories show up in this. Really, I know on the commentary you mentioned Who Would Kill Jesse, and the whole idea of manifesting this comic book character was very similar to what he's doing with this science fiction character. And again, I believe our main character in Who Wants to Kill Jesse falls in love with the comic book character and wants her to be around. It's interesting that we have these parallels just with Macourek and what he's bringing to the table. And I want to say, too, that I can't remember if he wrote Four Murders Are Enough, Honey, but it feels like there's some stuff in there, too, especially with all of the mistaken identity and who's coming in what room. You're talking about rooms and the lack of privacy. Who comes into what room and hears what when.
Yeah.
But that's also very romantic comedy.
Very screwball.
I do love that blend of screwball comedy with some unexpected genres. And I think he did that kind of a lot. Like he made this other earlier movie called The Man from the First Century. He wrote Girl on a Broomstick. So just these combinations of more classical melodrama and drama with sci-fi and fantasy. I'm just such a sucker for it, especially when it's made by Czech writers and filmmakers. But of course, there are a lot of great, we would then call them Yugoslavians, but Croatians working on this too.
I think we have covered, holy cow, 7 movies, not including this one that he has written.
He's great. So of course.
He's great. And he was very prolific. So that's just a drop in the bucket to his 127 credits.
Jeez.
There's still time.
Yes. The Macourek cast coming your way.
2 straight years of it to cover the rest.
That's not all movies. That's shorts, that's TV series, all these things. But yeah, this should track down these movies. And I'm so glad that so many of these are coming back into print or are in print. It makes my heart very happy. Everybody within the sound of my voice needs to see Tomorrow I'll Wake Up and Scald Myself with Tea, because that is fantastic.
Indeed.
Yeah. These films, anytime Deaf Crocodile announces they're doing something Eastern European, it always makes me happy, because there really are so many films from that region, especially 60s, 70s, and even 80s films, that I think people who have a taste for cult cinema would absolutely love. They just have been so hard to get a hold of. And like you said in the beginning of the episode, even when you could find bootlegs and files of things, they often look terrible. The subtitles are really hard to follow because there are some language variances with these, like not so much with the Czech films, but with the films that are in either Serbian or Croatian, which are pretty similar, but it's like, seems like an uphill battle for a translator trying to do decent subs.
That's been the toughest part lately for me, is as I start to dive deeper into Eastern European cinema, just finding the subtitle files and finding accurate ones. I'll even take the inaccurate ones, please. Just give me something to glom onto where I can try to translate it more in my head and be like, oh, I think the English really means this.
Which is a skill that you also have to learn if you're watching a lot of East Asian movies, like many of those Hong Kong films that haven't gotten proper releases. You have to like learn how to read between the lines of what the subtitles are saying, but it's all part of the fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's a game. It's a big game.
Not to just fall back on physical media, but that's why I love people like Frank Zhang, who's out there. And one of the things he does best is he'll say, in this scene, they're saying this, which at the time specifically meant this, even though nowadays we think of it differently, which you don't get that sort of nuance with most of these.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's nice.
Yeah, I think it is so important that a lot of these smaller Blu-ray companies like Deaf Crocodile, because of the way the world is and the internet works, have access to more reliable translators to make better subtitles. But of course, when it comes to doing those type of really specific commentary tracks, there's nobody better than someone like Frank, who it's like growing up with the language and growing up with the cultural knowledge. It's just a whole other level.
I wanted to get back to the movie real quick and just talk about how convenient Andra is to have around, that she can actually create coffee with her hand and milk, which was good too. Special effects in this movie are interesting because they are very low budget, but they're very effective. Things like just like the flashing blue light that leads him around the island, and then their whole, I guess it's the spaceship that they're in, because it's the bigger version of the blue light. It's the actual ship that we get that looks a little bit like an Imperial probe droid type of thing, like the one that is going to get the information out of Princess Leia when she's on the Death Star, but it's a lot bigger than that one is.
The usual tactic of only showing you a portion of it on the actual film stock is nice too, because it saves them a buttload of money, but it still looks great.
When the movie itself looks really good, not only just the restoration, but the actual, like some of the special effects, like when fucking Targo is shooting lasers at Robert, those laser effects look really good. And maybe there's a couple little things here and there where I'm just like, oh yeah, that looks really cheesy. But it just works for me with the way that it is. And I love their costumes and everything too. It just all comes together as a piece very well.
It does surprise me that they chose to make this live action and work through dealing with some of these special effects. And of course, as I keep saying, we will get to the ending, which has some wonderful effects. But because the film studio, Zagreb Film, made so many animated movies, and I think animated cinema was just on a different level in Eastern Europe, especially in the 70s. People took it way more seriously than they were in the US, and they were able to make films in so many different genres, like both geared at adults and children, that you could easily have made this into an animated film. But I think seeing the choices that they were forced to make to deal with the budget and the limited technical capabilities makes it, I think, more endearing. And seeing some of those creative choices that they made, I think, is part of the pleasure of watching this.
The locations they choose helped quite a bit too. It gives us that beautiful, the island, of course, is the big conceit here, but you got that dock that they're by, you've got the villas that they're next to, the hotel looks great. All of it just fits in perfectly with the story they're telling.
Yeah, this is like a travel commercial for why you should want to go to the Croatian coast.
Hey, I've seen Radley Metzger's score. I already know where I want to go for a vacation.
Sure.
Because I think that was right around this area. I want to say it was in Croatia as well. Yeah, and they do some great things too when he is in the boat trying to get back from the island and their big blue ship is menacing him, fucking Targo again. It looks like they had an actual helicopter that they were using to whip up the wind and all this stuff because it looks really dangerous.
It does, and I'm wondering if maybe that was the most expensive thing about this film next to the stop motion, though I don't really have a good sense of how much that actually would have cost other than the time component.
Well, yeah, the stop motion, obviously, it's Jan Svankmajer, so it's really good. And then the costume, because I do want to talk a little bit about that monster, because we get him very briefly, I want to say twice before the big scene at the end. We definitely get him at one point on the island, because at one point, Robert is talking with a friend of his, and I don't remember that friend's name, but he's, oh, you should add a monster to this. And he's like, oh, okay. And they just go back and forth. They're big science fiction fans. And so when Targo shows up, he's like, oh, you tried to get rid of me as a character, but you didn't. Here I am. And then, oh, and here's that monster you're talking about. So he throws this toy down, and then the toy transforms into this monster. That costume and that design for that monster, fantastic. Just so fucked up. It looks like an elephant, but then its knees seem to be like ears. It's just wild the way this thing looks.
The amount of detail is crazy on this suit. They went into so much work on it.
And it almost feels like somebody on the production team said, look, if we're going to put a monster in it, we really need to make it as deranged as possible. And well done. But I do love that the monster is another symbol of how his imagination runs away with itself and has these often very unintended consequences. Although you could certainly make a case that it maybe has intended unconscious results, like things that he wants to happen because he doesn't want to have to settle down or part of him doesn't want to have to settle down and live this really rigid domestic life with everybody all up in his business. But the monster, I really would like to have been a fly on the wall when they were designing that costume. It's amazing. I wonder where it is now.
Is there some sort of Svankmajer museum someplace? It feels like there should be.
There should be, but this is so early in his career that I wonder if it even survived at all. I hope so.
It's funny, we've talked about Svankmajer on the show so many times, but have never covered one of his movies because he did special effects for Mysterious Castle in the Carpathians. I know I haven't covered Dinner for Adele, but I've talked about it several times. Feels like there was something else. Well, he was doing some paintings, he and his wife, I think, for the credits for one of the movies that we've talked about. It's like Svankmajer cast a shadow over so many Eastern European productions. But yeah, I've never even done an Alice episode or Conspirators of Pleasure. It feels like that one is a natural for me. I don't know why you, me, and Jim haven't talked about that one.
We should next year.
I'll send out a note and see if we can do that one.
Yeah, add it to our annual episode.
What fetish are we going to be talking about this year?
The suits are rubber. Who knows?
Yeah.
True. That's actually true.
Yeah. Yeah, we can stay in Japan and do Rubber's Lover or Pinocchio, square root of whatever. I love when he manifests his book and he takes it over to the bookstore and they're just like, oh yeah, we'll take this. And it's okay, that seems like that should be a real impetus to finish this book. But he's got so many other things happening in his life, including his day job, where, and we were talking a little bit before you got on the call, Sam. I can't remember if he's working multiple jobs, if he keeps getting fired. It feels like he keeps getting fired from different things.
It seems to me like he starts off as a hotel receptionist or something like that, but because he's so spacey, he keeps getting in trouble and keeps having to do different things. And he really just is not good at holding down a stable adult life. No judgment, but
in the first time we see him at the hotel where he gives the wrong key, he gives the key to 211 instead of 112 or vice versa. There's that big guy with the red hair and the beard and the white suit who shows up later on. That's a interesting character that they just don't spend a whole lot of time on. I'm like, what is this guy's story? Because he seems like he's almost a cult leader or something with the way that he dresses.
Quite memorable to barely be in it.
And when they're on the island looking for the aliens later on in the story, and that one woman's just, oh, we must show that we are open and pure. Let's all take off our clothes. And he's just, yeah, no.
There are some wild choices. It almost, in a way, feels like they fleshed out this narrative and then this like pretty basic narrative and then filled it in with all these little vignettes that are just so colorful, often so absurdist in a way that I think once you get a taste for Eastern European literary absurdism, it pops up in so many of these 70s films and into the 80s too, but I think it's like either you have a taste for it or you don't, but there's so much of it here. Again, didn't expect the dad to grow breasts so that he could feed his motherless baby. Also did not expect all these people to strip down naked waiting for the aliens to arrive.
I didn't expect poor BB to be turned into a cube.
That came out of nowhere.
Something had to happen with BB. She was just too all up in his business, getting between him and his robot girlfriend.
That's true. With her weird new hairdo, a very 1981 hairdo that she's wearing with looked like she used the crimpers to style it.
Just trying to be Rosie from the Jetsons there for a little bit.
That's a horrifying thought.
What's horrifying to me was that poor guard that they almost killed, and they had him in stasis, and they're pulling out his organs and looking at the organs and putting them back in. And then that Robert, he touches the sphere, so it dissipates, and then we find out that they have time control, so he is able to, or they're able to rewind for a little bit and get the sphere back and everything. And of course, that will be used later on in the film. I'm glad that they set that up here. But just that he can remember it later on. And we see that guy talking. He's, oh, yeah, they pulled my heart out and were showing it to me. I'm like, oh, my God, this is horrific.
Yeah, the number of times that this movie could get really dark, but remains pretty lighthearted, that in itself is wild. It's like at any moment, it seems like it's going to become more extreme than it does. I think I talked about this in the commentary, but the way they set up his relationship with Andra, it's like this could become a robot sex comedy at any time, or like an alien sex comedy at any time, and it never really goes in that direction, but instead becomes a stop-motion monster movie. It's what is happening here?
That's, I guess, the second time they reverse time is when it almost becomes a robot sex comedy, when BB comes in and he's all up in Andra's business, and it's, oh, no, we gotta go back from there. Or actually, that's when they reverse time a lot towards the end to really try to set things right. That's what it is.
Which is such a great device.
Well, I love that when they do turn her into a cube, first they turn her into a cube that's too big, so the hand is sticking out, which is good. And then turn into a smaller cube. It reminded me of another Macourek film, which is How to Drown Dr. Marchek, and how they turn, I think it's the mother, or I can't remember which character it is, that they turn into a bag of flour, and then they bake her into a pie later on, and then the pie can talk to them. But yeah, there's the cube, and the cube can sneeze. When they pull up to the dock, and the cube gets thrown overboard, and Robert has to hire a diving person to go in and try to find the cube, and he keeps bringing up other cubes. Is this the one? No, that's far too big. It's like, how many cubes are in this bay?
And what's in them all?
Or who's in them all?
Are they all victims?
I feel like out of almost any of these scenes, the way that like we've been saying, they just show you flashes of things. You could make so many spin-off movies just based on these individual flashes. Like turning people into cubes, I wish that was explored a little bit more, because one of my favorite things about this is, I know you were saying earlier that you sometimes question how much of this is happening in Robert's head and how much is actually happening. And while I think it is all meant to be actually happening, the story really centers around Robert in the sense that the aliens and the visitors from Arkana Galaxy don't give a shit about anyone except for Robert. And it's like they regard everyone else as inconveniences.
Mm-hmm.
And on the opposite end of that, the local government also doesn't care about the visitors at all. And they're just like, yeah, whatever, until it becomes this thing where people are responding like the Beatles have arrived or something, but more naked.
I love what you were saying in the commentary about how they could destroy Robert in a heartbeat because he is a puny human and they are much more advanced and can do all these things, have lasers pop out of their fingers or from their eyes or any of these kind of things, and that they just seem to be barely tolerating him, and then they don't care about anybody else. They only seem to care about him because he's the creator, and that's it.
One way I looked at that actually is I'd love to see the side story of Photo Tony fleshed out even more, because man, speaking of invasive, he is everywhere. First of all, literally taking pictures of this love triangle unfolding in this living room, which is super awkward. But beyond that, like, he's there photographing a finger going into a meat grinder and on the dock when the cube is coughing, and he's there for everything, but can never catch a break. Like, this guy has to have the worst luck in the world.
And he lives with his mom, doesn't he?
Yeah, his mom and her little dog.
That's right. Yeah, he is one of my he's maybe my favorite of all the side characters, even more so than Biba, because he's just always convinced that at any moment he's going to make it big and doesn't seem to lose that sort of sense of excitement. But it really is comical how wrong things go for him. But the meat grinder scene made me laugh so hard. It's so wonderful.
And I kept thinking that he got a shot of it before it went into the meat grinder, and that's what he's going to show the people, because he keeps going in, like Peter Parker going into the Daily Bugle going, okay, here's some photos, buy my photos. And it's, what the hell are you showing us? A plate of meat with some what on there? What, it looks like salt or something. What is that thing? No, that's an alien finger, of course. And then later on, yeah, when he shows his photos of the love triangle, it's like you can barely see Andra over his shoulder. Just like not even half of her face. Look at this. Oh, Tony. Oh.
It almost reminds me of growing up in the 80s and early 90s. I feel like there were all these things in the news about people who tried to capture some religious or supernatural thing, but it's like they just picked the wrong moment. And that's definitely what's going on here for Tony. And you got to feel bad for him.
I'm trying to remember who the teacher is on Fairly Odd Parents, because he's got the same thing where he's like convinced that there are fairies and he's always trying to get the goods on them. And every single time he does, it ends up being wrong. It's 1 second too late or 2 seconds too early type of thing. Yeah, that whole thing. Was there anybody on Alf that was trying to out Alf? Because it feels like that would have been a perfect counterpoint to this one.
That definitely
so.
is a trope in these kind of fantasy sci-fi stories.
It's like the Kravitzes, right? Across the way. I'm Bewitched is what I should say. Here I am talking like everybody knows who the Kravitzes are.
But everyone should. Bewitched is a great show.
And that's Mr. Crocker, by the way, for the guy who's obsessed with fairy godparents.
Actually, now that you mentioned Bewitched, this does have certain things in common with it. That's obviously much more fantasy than sci-fi, but the sci-fi elements here are used in such a fantastical way. But because at its core, it's basically a screwball comedy about a guy trying not to get married when all the women around him are really trying to get him married. It's very, yes, this has all these fun, fantastical elements, but there's also a lot of kind of domestic morality themes happening. And that's, of course, Bewitched to a T.
It's literally what they built the plot around.
Yeah, less nose wiggling.
More cube coughing.
Mm-hmm. But so the cube coughing is one of the elements that I think made me wonder why they didn't just make this an animated film, because so many of those decisions do feel like things that would show up in a cartoon rather than in something live action. But it's not that it isn't great to see them happen with these effects. It's just so much fun.
Oh, I finally I remembered when he gets fired. Isn't he putting a mustache on his boss's papers? And his boss is standing like right over his shoulder.
He can't be brought down to earth. He just has to be allowed to live with his head in the clouds.
Yeah, as he should. Would love to read Visitors from the Arkana Galaxy. I think that Richard could have one of the best voices from this era in sci-fi.
Especially if he gets rid of Targo.
Yeah, fucker.
I love how much you hate Targo.
Who wouldn't? Who likes Targo? You know?
I don't think anyone likes him. It just, your vitriol is...
Oh, yeah. He screws everything up this whole time. I feel bad for him when he's being hunted by the guys in the wetsuits with their tridents and everything, their spear guns, but they obviously are no match for the powers of the aliens. I don't think they're in any danger or anything.
No, but he does have a very Dennis the Menace kind of quality.
I would have liked to have known a little bit more about Ulu, too, just to know what makes her tick.
Yeah, there was not much backstory there.
I think the main focus of the kids is mostly they want Andra's attention and they don't want her to pay more attention to Robert than she pays to them. So it almost has this weird Brady Bunch, I want to marry your mom, so I have to deal with you damn kids vibe.
It seems like they needed a bit of an antagonistic approach to a couple of the scenes too. So that was a nice conceit to have them be a part of it, because Andra just seems to be there to serve for a lot of this.
Yeah, she's like space nanny.
Yes, it's a little disappointing. She could be doing so much more with herself.
I could see this movie being something that if I were living in this area at this time, it feels like they would have shown this on TV, except then when I think about all the naked bodies and stuff, I'm like, yeah, maybe not. Maybe this isn't good for a Saturday afternoon. But otherwise, it feels like this is something that kids would have watched when they were coming up in the world.
That's actually a good question, because I know that most European productions, even for television, don't have as much of an issue with nudity, but I'm not totally sure how that would have played out in early 80s Yugoslavia. But it does feel like it's meant to have a kind of family-friendly vibe. This is not a film meant just for adults, I don't think.
Yeah, nothing was sexualized with the nudity at all. And then on top of that, even the violence at the end most of it is rather comedic.
But I can imagine if you watched that when you were 6 or 7, that monster would be scary as hell, probably.
Especially the way that the monster can change itself. So we should probably just finally get into this monster scene, because it's amazing. Just this creature that we've seen as a toy that grows up or can grow up, and at one point, it gets put into Biba's bag by mistake, and she takes it home with her, and they're having, it's interesting because we see discussion of a wedding happening early in the film, and then we get to experience the wedding party later on in the film, and that's where this monster attacks. And it's not a fast-moving attack. It's much more just people running a little bit away from it and just cowering more in this room. But to see this monster, we already talked about the design a little bit, but I just love the way that it seems to up the stakes over and over again, that it has like the little thing that comes out of its nose it looks like a tongue or some sort of sniffer, and it's there playing around with these flowers. So I'm just like, oh, isn't that nice? The monster wants these pretty flowers, but it's got a little bit, I can't say it's got an agenda, because it doesn't seem like it's going to murder everyone out of spite, but it just is going to murder pretty much everybody that comes in contact with it.
And cause just total chaos in this like small packed room where they're holding the reception. And it's probably my favorite part I do love this film, but this is just monster freak out scene. It almost reminds me of something like a Peter Jackson or Evil Dead, or just this sense of like the filmmakers are using these horror genre tropes, but they're just having a good time, and there's all this chaos rather than this kind of attempt to build up any sort of dread like you see in more typical monster movies. But I also just wanted to say that the stunt performer, Peter Drozda, this, I think was one of his first films. He's also in Tomorrow I'll Wake Up and Scald Myself a Tea, but went on to be in a bunch of Hollywood movies. Like, he's in Gladiator, he's in one of my favorite German gore movies, Prometheus, like all over the place. And so it's just great to see a stunt performer, somebody who's not like a main star, have this kind of career. Like, I imagine that man could tell some wild stories about some of the productions he's been involved in.
I just love how gross this monster is. Like, when they cut off that thing that comes out of its snout and it just is green slime going everywhere. Oh, and I guess it's killing people with that, because the two sisters, Biba has two sisters, and they both are there on the ground. We don't see their faces, but it looks like the creature somehow murdered these two ladies and then goes on downstairs to that wedding party. And yeah, poor photo Tony trying to take some more good photos of it, but the time travel or the time reset will take care of his pictures. But I love when he accidentally drops his bag and the flash is going off, and that seems to be driving the creature a little crazy. I was hoping that would come back to be like, this is how you defeat this thing, but I don't think there is a way to defeat this thing.
Yeah, it's sort of like Ernest Scared Stupid, the scene with the troll at the end, where there's just this rampaging chaos.
This one almost seems worse because it just has this unending list of crazy weapons that it can just pull out of nowhere. It's got a gas chemical attack. It's got this thing that turns into a mouth literally on its knee that can bite somebody's hand off. And then I was just blown away at the end. We have a fucking flamethrower all out of nowhere. Like, what? That's amazing.
I love when it grows teeth on its hands so it can bite somebody's hands off. And this whole scene, and they play it for laughs, but they don't overdo it, which I really commend, is the grandfather sitting there with his accordion, the blind and mostly deaf grandfather, just sitting there playing the accordion the entire time that this is going on.
So good.
I love it. It's so good.
I love the humor with it too, because when the flamethrower comes out, he's literally just dabbing sweat.
Yeah, I don't know how much they paid Jan Svankmajer to work on some of the stop motion here, but it was worth every cent. And also whoever designed the actual monster suit, A+.
Yeah, I love when the ears unroll and it is flipping around with those ears and everything. And then you've got that great moment where the doctor is like, oh no, like it just needs somebody to be a friend to it. And then he goes up and eventually it's his hand, maybe even his whole arm, I can't remember, ripped off. Thought that was pretty nice.
They had the scene where they flattened one of their heads, and when he stands up, his head, like it's a very good effect for this film. I was shocked with the budget they had. It looked very good.
And the photo, Tony's just, you'll see in the pictures when they come out how this looks.
Poor photo Tony.
The scene goes on for a long time, but that they keep it interesting and keep changing things makes it effective. It's not, is this ever going to end? But they really keep it going with just the way that the creature can change, the way that he keeps upping the ante as well as the people up the ante. And you've got the father with his shotgun that we saw earlier in the film. We've got just all of these different types of people, including that doctor and everything. And just that we get to see how much the creature loves to remove people's heads as well. And when the father's head is in the soup and he says, I have a feeling I'm missing something. Oh, man.
It is genuinely such a funny film. And I love that it manages to just get funnier and funnier leading up to this end sequence.
Sam, how did this one even come to be as far as a Yugoslavian, Czechoslovakian co-production?
So my understanding is just because of proximity that they were able to pull. So it's mostly a Yugoslavian film, but because they were able to pull in some Czech talent and some funding, I think that's why it's officially a co-production. But some of it is also the way that Yugoslavia and just that whole region was changing in the early 80s, when there is a little bit more of an ability to do what you want creatively. I think that's why they were able to get permission, because it's not like one of the Czech New Wave films. There isn't anything radical politically going on here. It's really just like a domestic drama and a romantic comedy that has these other genre elements. So I think because it was a pretty like safe film, they had no trouble getting it made. But it is one of those films that's tricky to talk about now, because it's like, what does Yogoslavian even mean? But so I think it's almost easier to think of it as a Croatian film with Czech involvement, if that makes sense. Because it's like clearly shot in Croatia. Most of the actors are Croatian. And you just happen to have a Czech writer. And so to me, it feels more Croatian, I would say.
Yeah, it used to be a lot easier to study the geography of that land when it was just like 4 or 5 countries, and now there's so many more. But
probably for the best.
It is definitely for the best that they split up and are more self-managing and not being thrown together just because of the greater powers that be. I'm glad that they've had their moments to break apart and be more self-actualized.
Yugoslavia was 7, 8 different countries. It basically just means Southern Slavic countries. So I think would have been part of the Soviet Union if it hadn't been for Josef Tito, who was also, for anyone listening who doesn't know this history, was also communist, but told Stalin to fuck off and was really one of the only people who could get away with that. So Yugoslavian cinema, I think, does wind up feeling pretty different, because he initially, what he wanted to do was have more permissive things like arts and writing and media. But even he had his limits. Filmmakers who were parallel to the Czech New Wave, the Yugoslav Black Wave, people like Dusan Vukotic. Makovejev made a couple films, and then Tito was like, all right, maybe we have to put some rules into place.
On that similar note, Sam, based on your research, do you think this was at all like an actual tourism draw for them? Because they focus so much on the tourist in this and the literal beauty of the landscape. I feel like they definitely could have seen this as almost like an advertising campaign to get some more money in there.
I don't know the actual answer to that question. My assumption is it probably was a bonus that they were highlighting this really beautiful natural geography. But I think part of that was also, we have this great location that will make the film look much richer than if it's just shot in his apartment. And also has these moments that feel maybe a little bit uncanny, like when they're in those caves. It's just such a great location. It almost reminds me of something like on the Silver Globe, the Zhuavsky sci-fi film, where so much of it is shot on a beach and shot in these caves. And that's not Croatia, but I think it serves a similar function where it just adds so much to with that location shooting to the overall visual look of the film that I'm sure the film office was like, oh yes, also people will think that Croatia's beautiful and not some run down communist backwater type of place, but it's like actually part of the Mediterranean. I feel like it was a bonus and not an intentional focus of the film.
Makes sense.
Come here and get your own beach vacation and robot alien.
Maybe find a finger?
Yeah, the other part of that coffee thing that I forgot was how good the special effect is for that when the cup forms on the saucer. You get the saucer and then the cup forming on it. And I'm not sure how they did that. It feels like they might have done it in reverse where you just remove part of the cup, but just it looks really good. And that cup looks like it is solid the entire time.
Yeah, I think anyone who likes horror, fantasy, sci-fi effects definitely will love a lot about this film.
I really like the whimsical editing of the end. I feel like he's stuck in this void with them and you don't get much out of it, but it's just a really interesting choice to make for the ending of this. And of course, he still got fucking Targo there to screw with him. But yeah, it's a fun ending.
It's almost like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where Roy Neary leaves his wife and leaves his kids.
Yeah.
Just goes off with the alien. And see you later. Bye.
Now he can create in peace.
Though Biba can still reach him all the way out in space if she wants to.
Which, it seems like the happiest possible ending if you're a sci-fi author who really wants to live in your otherworldly, fantastical imagination land. It's like he gets to go there.
I love that image of him at the desk with the helmet and then all of them floating there. There is no chair for Andra. The kids are floating, the monsters that are with them, and they're all floating. And you can see the chair that Ulu is sitting on. It's not quite chroma keyed out perfectly, but hey, what are you going to do?
It's delightful.
It is. It's so fun. And I'm just so glad that this is now out and available for people to see. And to see in a really nice looking version and not that shitty VHS that was floating around all those years ago.
Yeah, that version was so fuzzy, and this is just so crisp and beautiful, and I think really does not only highlight the special effects, but also just how beautiful these parts of Croatia are.
All right, let's go ahead and take a break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
Humans, listen to me. Due to an error in calculation, there are still a few of you left. You escaped destruction because I did not know you existed.
Because we managed to get together enough fuel to take a rocket ship to the space platform. And there's enough serum on board to immunize the entire garrison there.
The Great One himself sends the cosmic blast that atomizes rocket ship, space platform.
Mommy, why doesn't he like people?
We want peace, Roman, but peace with honor.
I will talk with the girl. It is not in the plan, but although I cannot verify it, I feel that she will understand. No!
You mean there are certain things nice girls don't do? Even if it means that man's millions of years of struggle up from the sea, the slime, the fight to breathe air, to stand erect, to think, to conquer nature, even if all was to stop cold by a doting father and a jealous suitor.
Alice and I want to get married.
I am ordered to kill you. I must do it with my hands.
How is it you're so strong, Roman? It seems impossible.
Suppose I were human. Would you treat me like a man?
That's right, we'll be back next week with an absolute classic of science fiction, Robot Monster. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Ryan and Sam. So, Sam, what is happening with you, ma'am?
Just a million deadlines, like always. Things that I wanted to shout out. I started a new podcast called Eros plus Massacre that is basically focused on cult cinema. I'm really trying to highlight films and subgenres and filmmakers that I think are underappreciated. And so it will be all over the place genre-wise. There will be some art house cinema in there, and I'm excited about it. You can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, and the Cinepunks network, and you can get episodes early and other bonus episodes over on my Patreon.
Sam, people want to hear people talk about one genre and one genre only, maybe a specific like decade or year even. This whole thing of jumping around in genres, nobody wants that.
And nobody wants any kind of political discussion, which is why you get so many glowing reviews, and I'm sure I will too.
And Ryan, how about yourself? What are you doing these days?
If you want to come leave a review and complain about my politics as well, I do a show called The Disc Connected that covers all of the physical media announcements. It's a live show every Thursday night. And then I also do an interview with an industry professional every week. I also, thanks to Mike White's inspiration, actually started a magazine last year called The Physical Media Advocate. It's available on Amazon. You can get it in a handful of retailers across the country. I get a bunch of experts to write articles on film and physical media, and it's going super well. And then just to shout out Weirding Way Media again, started another podcast with Mr. Chris Stashu called Film Foundations, and it's going super well. We cover a very specific artist, whether it be a director, actor, maybe a micro-genre or a franchise every week, and break it down for everybody, and it's a good time. Check it out.
I have to tell you, as many physical media releases as I work on, I never know when anything is coming out, and most of the time I find out because of the Disconnected.
Amazing. I'm glad to help.
So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate every single time you tag me when you announce that there's an extra that I'm on, because it's like, oh, good, it's out. Oh, or it's coming out. This is good. So
yeah, no, I feel the same way.
Happy to help.
Keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate you.
You got it.
Thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.